Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this morning. We have the privilege of having CEO Tim Dain join us here as we review our 2024 Northstar MLS subscriber report. So we're really excited to feature this, have some discussion and dialogue with Tim, and get his perspective on some things here throughout the year. So with that, we're going to dive right in. This is our agenda today. I'll introduce the report. We'll have some report review and insight from Tim himself, and then we'll have a little Q&A session based on some questions that were submitted to us ahead of time by our subscribers that Mandy will help facilitate here at the end of the webinar. So we will go through those. Tim will provide some feedback and answer those questions for us. So the Northstar MLS subscriber report, and just as you'll notice here through our presentation, there are QR codes. You can simply scan those, and they will open up a digital copy of this report that we are talking about here today. So just keep that in mind. Again, we've got the 2024 Northstar MLS subscriber report. We partnered with T360, who is an industry expert on the real estate industry. And they also create the Sonopol Trends Report, as you are probably very familiar with seeing. And the reason why we did this report is really to provide that transparency to our subscribers and again, outline those trends and a future roadmap for Northstar MLS as a whole. This is what our report contains. So we've got 5 sections, and as you'll see, if you do go to that report digitally, we've got a report overview, our Northstar MLS overview, state of the MLS, real estate trends, and then Northstar MLS in 2024. So really looking at the MLS moving forward. Again, keep in mind, T360 is the authors of this report, so they did produce it, and they just, ran some interviews with us, gathered some information and all of those nice little details, but in general, they produced this report and provided some of the industry trends and whatnot, and to kind of help balance out what we were portraying as an entity as Northstar MLS. So with that, I'm going to hand it over here to Tim, and he is going to take it away.
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. I guess the first thing, I'll dive a little deeper into why the report. Over the last probably, I don't know, 4 years, I realized that a lot of people on the call are maybe waking up to some of the lawsuits and since the settlement and sort of diving deeper now than they have before. But over the last 4 to 5 years, MLS executives, association executives, NAR members, and some brokers have been fairly dug in and buried in that process, in those depositions, in that discovery process. And throughout it all, I think one of the things that I keep hearing is that MLSs need to become more transparent, that members need to understand more about the MLS, what they do, what function they serve, what role they serve, what benefits they provide, what value they provide back to the realtors, or depending on the state you're in, the real estate agents, the licensed agents and brokers, appraisers, and everybody else in the chain that we service. So I wanted to sort of take a really deep dive. And with this first report, we sort of level set. We give some education around the different makeup of MLSs across the country. So not just Northstar, we sort of expand beyond that. We also gave a chapter to the state association so that they could go over a little bit of their lobbying efforts within Minnesota. So I think one thing I want you to keep clear here is that we didn't actually write the report. We sort of opened up the commode to T360 and we said, what do you want? What's interesting? What are you hearing from everybody around the country that's interesting? So we shared with them financials, we shared with them strategic plans, product roadmaps, pretty much anything and everything. As they asked questions, we simply answered it. I won't say that we didn't have choice or a little bit of editing throughout, just because some things we thought were interesting, other things we thought maybe not so much. When you get to the section of the report that is the industry trends, we left that entirely up to them. We said, pick your 3 most read trends out of your most recent report. And if you've never seen one of these, this is the last T3 trends report. It's probably the most definitive dive we have in the industry around the trends that are happening. So those were pulled straight from their T3 trends report, and they're just sort of a copy paste so that we could give a little taste of what they do out to the entire membership, because I realize not everybody orders that report. So starting with that premise, one of the areas that I think was important to me when I got here a year and I don't know, 8 or 9 months ago, was to really dive deep into the staff that I was sort of inheriting from John Mosey, who was moving into retirement, and really try to find out what they felt the core values of the company was, how they serve members, really diving into what they think we do well, what they think we should stop doing because we weren't doing it well or it wasn't necessary, and some of the new things that we should start doing. So these first 4 bullet points here really became personal to us, I think. So David, if you wouldn't mind throwing up page 14, where we dive a little deeper into some of those North Star core values. I think this is important because this is how we serve you. These are sort of the things that we hold ourselves accountable for. We have an internal program called Motivosity. I might be giving too much information here, but Motivosity, each member of the staff, it's not a lot of money, but they get $5 every month, and they get to sort of award each other for doing things within the company, and they have to award based on sort of these core values. So they might award $1 to somebody that sends a really great email, that they're copied onto a broker, or somebody that made them happy that day, those kind of things. So I just want to kind of really quickly go over these. One, reliable information. I think to the staff, the facts really matter. So I know we send out, it's easy to tie this to something like the compliance process where we send out violations because you don't have the right fact in the MLS. Maybe it was a 4-bedroom and you put a 3-bedroom. Important note there, we do not fine, I think, over 90% of the violations that we send out. So most of these violations are informational, corrective in nature, those kind of things. So it's not we don't try to take a penalistic approach with that. But really for us, the internal side of the facts matter is that taking the time to really communicate effectively back and forth so that we lay it out in a way that everybody understands the purpose and where we're headed. Being really dependable for each other, dependable upon each other is important to us because we're spread all over the United States now. We have people that live on an island. We have people in DC, Texas, and here in Minnesota where most of the staff still live, but they're all remote. So being able to depend upon each other to be there in a remote environment, as you all know, is a pretty key component of what we do. Being transparent, that's what this report is all about. So I think that the truth always leads to the best outcome. I always tell our board of directors and probably to most members, there's very little you can't know if you ask. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to engage in conversations. And with that, I'll do one of the things that I always do on these because I do not hide myself. I'm going to give everyone on this call my mobile number. You're free to use it too. Just know that I'm one person and you're 22,000, but I'm happy to return calls. Most of the time I answer the calls and I'm happy to answer questions. And then we like to be very comprehensive, right? So we collect and we share what we know about the North Star MLS marketplace. And I hope this report really begins to demonstrate that. The next 3 are the next 2 I'll kind of skip through much more quickly. The broker centricity. I think this is important to us to always think about the business you're in and how you're being served at every level. So we really focus, while we might have association shareholder owners and association customers that are somewhat above us and kind of focusing on the business and the services we provide, we like to focus sort of on the businesses you provide to, whether you're a brokerage providing them to your agent or whether you're the agent itself. So definitely we go for the greater good. We don't like to solve the little problem. We'd rather solve the bigger problems. And the bigger problems tend to solve those small problems in return. And then taking the next step to deliver the unexpected. Again, this report might be a demonstration of that, but I think we do it all the time in different areas. The fearless technology is really more about how our tech team works internally, measuring their results, making sure that if we're investing in something and we realize it's not going to work, we stop as soon as we can figure that out, instead of trying to continue on down a path that's not working for us. And then the last one I'm going to focus on because this one's probably the one that's most important to me. I know it seems weird to have something called deliberate happiness in here, but I believe that if we are capable of this, if we're capable of empowering others taking a moment to just breathe when things are going bad, and really making an effort to show up in a happy state of mind, that it makes all the difference in the world. After all, we are at work for, roughly 90,000 hours in our lifetime. So I think it's important to be happy where you work as often as possible. So I'll stop there. I'll just say that we're really focused on how we serve you and how we serve each other internally. And then David, if you pop over to 17, I'm really just going to bounce around this. This report has so much information and so much detail. I encourage you to read it all. And I'm just highlighting a few of the areas because they seemed maybe, I don't know if more important is the right word, but they seem more relevant to me for this call. So this graph down below is our product usage. And later on, we did source some questions ahead of time. And I noticed there was a question about a couple of products that were deprecated. So I wanted to go through this and tell you that every single month we're measuring usage. We're surfacing that to the board of directors. The board of directors is you. They're brokers, they're agents that practice the business every day. And they get to see all of this information. Who's using it? How are they using it? How often are they using it? What's a unique user versus a monthly user or an active user? And we start to measure that subscriber base against the percentage of people using the software. And you'll see we have pretty good utilization of most things. When it starts to drop below 10% utilization, we start to really look at it. So if you think about this, this is usage against the total membership, 22,000 subscribers to our service. I think everybody clearly knows that, and I'm going to be very generic in here because I haven't pulled a stat, but let's say roughly half are doing less than 3 transactions a year. So if you were to cut that subscriber count in half, you're essentially doubling or more the percentage of subscribers. So based on active user subscribership, it's actually higher than the numbers you see here because we're comparing against many people that aren't actually in the business and in the system on a daily basis. But I wanted to kind of go to the bottom of this. I think everybody knows the things that are adopted widely, but if we go down to the things that aren't as adopted, so if you go down to like RPR, I think this might be one of the biggest travesties in our services. Is it up a little bit, David? There you go, right there. Nope, down, down, down. There you go, right there. RPR has about a 16.6%. This is a service you pay for in your NAR member dues. So you're not even paying at the MLS for this service. And it is a very robust system that has improved dramatically over time. So if you were a person that went and looked at this when it first launched years ago and you sort of wrote it off, I would encourage you to go back and look at it again. Number one, we have a lot more market data available there than we do in our base systems, only because it has other MLSs outside of our service area that share information or data with us. So if you're a member of Northstar and for whatever reason you need to see something in Duluth where they have their own MLS, you can see it in RPR. You can even schedule a showing on a property in Duluth via RPR through showing time integration. So I'll kind of stop there. I just wanted to point out that I think it's a travesty that more people aren't looking at it and utilizing it. And then if I go through, the MLS Touch is our newest mobile app, so that's probably why it's a little lower on the chart. I think we do a decent job of marketing, but we're not marketers by nature. As this product gains a little bit more time in the marketplace, I expect that it will keep rising. I will say that it's the mobile app that we are improving the most. So we put our most time and attention to that, and that's only because it is directly tied to Matrix. The same company owns both systems. So it's sort of the Matrix mobile app, if you will, even though it's not a perfect duplication of Matrix. And then if I go down to down payment resource, this is another one that I think is dramatically underutilized. I think most people think of down payment resource as a way to service people that need help buying a home, right? Maybe they're first-time home buyers or they're lower income home buyers, and nothing could be further from the truth. There are down payment assistance programs across a very wide spectrum of homes and people. So if you haven't taken a deep dive into that, I would encourage that as well. Pop over to page 18, David. Oh, 17. I did put 17 in here. You can keep it. That's page 17, so you can go up. We'll talk really briefly about 17. This is sort of what we did in 2023, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'll spend time on my favorite one, which is the second one from the top left, faster updates. One of the things I noticed when I got here is that because we build our own technology and our own ad edit, and because we were utilizing what's called RETS technology to transfer that data from our ad edit and our system over to Matrix and Paragon and Flex and everything else that you use, there were several steps where that data got passed from one to another, and then it would have to be updated in their systems. So on average, when it was good, we were running about 10 to 15 minutes to update each listing change. We've reduced that to on average about 1 minute. And with Flex, which was our first test partner for our new way of delivering data via web API, we've actually reduced that down to seconds. So this year we'll continue to work on that sort of speed of transfer of data so that it gets as close to real time as possible, moving from our system to all the other systems. Now go ahead and scroll down to the next page. These are our customer service scores. We measure these all the time after every single phone call, every interaction, and then annually we measure them as well. They're good. They're not great. I'm not going to pretend that they're great. I think compared across MLSs nationwide, they're above the average. Not dramatically above the average, but slightly above the average. So we're all focused on making sure we improve these over time. We measure this in 5 different areas, which you can see over there on the right. And we did improve it year over year, but we'll continue to focus on this. We'd like to be in the mid 90s with all of these. So we've got some improvements to do. Training's a kind of an odd one for us because you're not just grading our training in that, you're also grading the training that you're getting from associations because they're a big extension of what we do and they provide a lot of that frontline service. And the responsiveness is probably the one that we really own the most of because even though our associations take phone calls, we're taking the overwhelming majority of those phone calls. I think Mike, I don't know the numbers, but it's a couple thousand phone calls a month flow into Northstar MLS. And then association by association, it's dramatically less because they have segments of the membership. But we're wholly focused on improving these over the next year. 19. I think this is one of the more interesting things we did. I've never seen, that's the finances, David. There you go. I've never seen this done. I've seen MLSs typically they'll do an annual report that is very focused on just the audit. And more often than not, that audit only goes to association shareholders, board members. Very rarely will you see an MLS actually publish out an audit. So while you don't see actual dollar numbers here, we wanted to find a way to really be transparent about how we're spending money, where it goes, what we pay for what systems, and how we're paying that. So as you can see, we spend well over 60% on 3 core components that are vital to your business. It's the base MLS system, the transaction system, and the tax record or public record system. As you go down the chain, it becomes less and less portion of our budget. The cloud computing, we build our own technology here. The single sign-on dashboard, again, important to make sure you have access to all your systems without 20 different logins. Showing time, obviously, it's a vital piece. Showing service is a vital piece. I don't know that showing time itself, but we look at services every year and sort of compare them to what you have. And then we also balance that against the fact that it has a very high adoption rate. So some systems we get asked all the time, again, being really transparent, why do you use this showing service over that showing service? Or why don't we go out and research some new tool that somebody found that they love a lot? A lot of it boils down to the fact that it's very hard to change user behavior. So if you have a very high adoption rate in the 70, 80%, and you replace that product no matter what it is, it's going to be a very difficult time, even if it's a better product. So we weigh that out. We weigh out how much we're spending, what it costs, how many people use it, those kind of things. Go ahead and scroll down, and we dive deep into a lot of other financial areas. Page 22, David. There we go. We dive pretty deep into a lot of other financial areas that I don't see many MLSs communicating or putting out. So if you look at the bottom graph here, it goes through our operating expenses for the year. And you can see how much we were spending on, so this is the non-COGS expense. If you're not a finance person, COGS are essentially the products and services that everybody uses. This is more the operating expense and how much we're dedicating to the departments that serve you. So you've got corporate, which I'll be 100% transparent again there. That's so out of whack over that year because that was the year that John Mosey retired. They had to do an executive search. They hired me. They had to have 2 CEOs for a period of time to do the transfer of knowledge. And then we also had a couple of key staff positions that changed with that as well. So we spent a lot more than we budgeted for last year on the corporate side of the business. Our IT came in under budget. Our help desk was a little over budget. Marketing was about 5% under budget, and our rules and regs enforcement was about 6% over budget. So we measure this month by month. I actually measure it week by week, and then we put it here for you guys to see. Page 30. This dives into, we've got a really good chapter here. I think this is something that a lot of people maybe don't care about, but some people that are very interested in how MLSs work across the country and how they serve as a fabric for the database of real estate might find this sort of geeky information really interesting. This is MLS ownership structure. So there are different ways that MLSs are owned across the United States. You can see there that about 8% of them are actually owned by brokerages. About 10% of them are hybrid, meaning they're owned by both brokerages and associations. And then about 82% are wholly association owned, or what we might call NAR affiliated. Northstar is in that 82%. We're owned by associations. If you scroll down a little bit, David. We also measure each MLS by size. So the average size of an MLS is about 3,600 users. Here at Northstar, we're about 22,000. Which means we fall into that mega MLS category in the top right. So membership size over 10,000. There are about 37 associations, and it's about 8.4% of the total population. Super geeky stuff, maybe not all that interesting until you really look at the whole chapter and start to ask yourselves why different MLSs are owned in different ways. A lot of it had to do with the history and the way they grew up. So in those broker-owned areas, they may not have had a dominant association. They may have instead had dominant brokerages that got together to start it up. In a lot of other areas, the brokerages probably approached the association to help them move from the very historic quote-unquote pocket listings, when you actually had to show up in a room with your listings in your pocket so that you could trade them back and forth before things were digitized. And you can imagine how that small community then grows as you add those to books, as you add those to computers, and then eventually onto the internet. You needed somebody that could start to service and do those things. So based on how they grew up in the local area, I would say is how most of these things ended up owned the way they are. There have been instances over time where an MLS may have moved from association owned to a hybrid model. I don't know of any off the top of my head that went from association owned direct to broker owned, but it's a pretty fascinating history. It's an interesting chapter to check out if you really want to know more about the MLS and the ownership structure and how they're laid out. Page 34. These are MLS collaborations. These are important to us, I think, because over the last several years, you've seen literally billions of dollars come into our industry. And we watched companies that realtors rely upon get bought, sold, change ownership hands. And oftentimes the owners aren't maybe aligned with the same mission and vision that the realtor member or the broker is aligned with. So over the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, maybe even going back a little more for some of these, MLSs have really come together to start to build some of that infrastructure out so that it's not all owned by large publicly traded or privately held companies. So as you flip through these, know that we're part of MLS Grid, which is more or less a data distribution company. There are several MLSs there. The benefit to that is that if you're a broker that pulls data from multiple MLSs and you're in these MLSs, you have one contract and one data feed versus there are 32 members here versus 32 contracts and 32 data feeds. You can imagine the cost burden to normalize each of those data feeds for your own use at your brokerage. So MLS Grid's a really important one. MLS Aligned is actually right on our border. They built out a showing service, which is an interesting showing service. We watched that evolve over time. I would say that they're starting to get towards feature parity with some of the other more popular showing services. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. RE Distribute is sort of the white hat of MLS data sales to what I would call an otherwise gray marketplace. So if you think of institutional underwriting, institutional investors, people that have a use for MLS data that aren't utilizing it for reasons that might compete with the brokerage or the realtor are typically going to be the customers of RE Distribute. Unfortunately, MLS data is a pretty valuable commodity, and there are a lot of companies that will do their best to scrape that data, leverage it, sell it, and not in ways that we always know about. So there have been several examples of lawsuits over time for those types of behaviors. But we participate in RE Distribute because it's sort of the white hat of that area. And then if I go down a little bit more, Nestle's just emerging. That's a sort of a consumer-facing website that was built by Bright MLS, the largest MLS in the country, and CRMLS. I guess those two would argue about who's the largest, but one or the other is the largest MLS, and then there's two other shareholders there with RE Colorado and Beaches. And they are starting now to reach out and find other customers across the country to have sort of an MLS and broker-owned web portal to compete with. I don't even know if their goal, I would say they would say that their goal is not to compete with the likes of Realtor.com, Zillow, Homes, Redfin, or broker websites. It's just to have a very industry-neutral portal that can service those that need that search to extend it out to their consumers. And then the last two are interesting. They're both sort of investment groups of MLSs, if you will. So Venture MLS is owned wholly by CRMLS, but they make a lot of investments into MLS technology, a little like if you've heard of NAR's arm, Second Century Ventures, which invests in realtor-friendly technologies. I would say that CRMLS is the same way, and it invests in MLS-friendly technologies, if you will. Moving on past that to page 65. So I'm skipping a chapter here because it's the sort of the trends chapter, and coming down to the bottom of this page, David. This is sort of where we're headed in 2024 from a product standpoint. So these are the new products that you've either started to see get integrated or you'll see integrated over this year. Earth Advantage is really about sustainable housing. So if you want to shorten that to green housing, if you will, they are probably the largest database of sustainable home features in the United States. So we'll be auto-populating listings where we find things that are within that category. So you'll have in your MLS, we'll add a lot of fields around this sort of sustainable features of homes, and you'll be able to click a button on an address. It'll populate what we have in that database, and you'll be able to automatically add it to your listing. Local Logic is probably the newest one. If you follow us on social media, you've seen a couple of posts about that. We have our agreement done with them. That takes a really deep dive into everything outside of the four walls around the house. So it can really turn you into a local expert all around the different areas that you service. Postcard Mania, I'll pair up with Sphere Builder and just say that we're dipping our toes into making advertising listings a little easier and a little more cost effective for agents that don't have these services from their brokerages, which honestly is pretty vast. I think there are some big brokers that provide these kind of services. They do a great job. They probably even offer you better pricing and more customized advertising to your brokerage. This is more for the wider group of people that don't have the ability to do Google ads, Facebook ads in a very clean, quick, reliable way. And obviously postcards, believe it or not, I worked at a company at one point in time that offered both of these, and postcard advertising still far outweighs digital advertising, which is surprising to me, but it's absolutely true. And then the last one, Welcome Matt. We're really excited about this one. This will add video to your MLS in the same way that we treat photos. So you'll be able to go to your computer, select all of your media types, photo or video, and drag and drop them and upload them all at the exact same time. We're also working with our vendors to try and prepare them for this change so that within an MLS system, as you're flipping through photos, you'll be able to play a video just like you would on a lot of the portals. And we've called a lot of the portals and a lot of the brokerages with larger website traffic audiences and started to have conversations with them about how they might integrate it onto their sites. It's important to us that you maintain the position of being the media provider outside of the MLS. So wherever this gets distributed, what we don't want to have happen long-term, I'm sure you've seen as well as me, the acquisitions of photography companies, of virtual tour companies, of dollhouse companies, you name it, there is a very big rush towards being the copyright owners of the media that agents and brokers produce. So this is the MLS sort of dipping its toe into that arena to give the brokerages and the agents the ability to have their own video service, maintain their own copyright to that, and then be able to distribute those in a way that makes sense to them. It'll have chaptering. It will have a broker side upgrade that will allow you to track analytics across the video, those kind of things, but that upgrade will not be mandatory. Page 66, the 2024 roadmap. The top 2 bullet points I'll hit on: completing the revamp and modernization of our Paragon front end. Currently, we only have about 600 people that actually use Paragon. It's a competitor to Matrix, which is overwhelmingly the more widely adopted front end that we have. But Paragon has rebuilt this from the ground up. Right now, if you were to go into Paragon, you'd have to click on a separate tab to launch their new version, but that new version will become the default eventually. And it's 100% rebuilt based on today's modern technology stack. So it starts with consumer. The front page is very different. I would say it's a vast departure from what you know as an MLS system today, but it's a really good vast departure. It would require you to sort of retrain. And I don't know if everybody on this call doesn't know, at Northstar, you can choose to have any of the front ends you want, whether it's Flex, Paragon, or Matrix. And if you want to switch from one to the other, you can do that pretty easily by calling us, or you can add a second one to try it out for, I think, $5 a month is the charge, Mike, is that right?
Yeah, 60 a year.
Yeah, so if
Annually.
along the way you want to just give a new front end like Paragon a shot to see if it works for you, if you've been wishing that I don't know, I don't want to, I love Matrix, and I'm not sort of bashing it by saying this, but a lot of times it gets called sort of the spreadsheet MLS system. And if you think that we've been stuck in the 2000s with our technology, I would say give Paragon a try. It's a pretty vast departure and a pretty robust modernization of an MLS system. And then continuing to work on the real-time ad edit. Again, just driving that home. We spent a lot of money to develop our RESO web API, and we're going to continue to push towards things like update API so that other programs can actually update listings, whether it be price or status, those kind of things. So being able to do that for mobile apps is really important to us, but we have to put the technology framework in place. And then the last bullet point there, again, is the video integration, video upload in the MLS. I kind of covered how important that was. Sorry, that was start again on this page, and I think that's the only areas I wanted to dive into with the report. I really want to encourage you, though, to sit down, review the report, and especially if you're on this call, send me feedback. This is not an easy thing for us to produce. It took a lot of work from T3. It took a lot of interaction with us. We had to stop what we were doing a lot of times and supply reports, answers, updates. And it's not an inexpensive thing to do either. It's not ungodly expensive, but anytime you're hiring a third-party company to come in and analyze what you do, there's a number of hours that are into creating this. So I want it to be valuable to you. If you flip through it all and you think it's not valuable or you see areas it can be improved, I want to hear about this. Our goal is to do this every 2 years. So every other year, we're going to put on a pretty large event. If you didn't go to our last event, it was called 3Icon. We're going to try to do something like that every other year, and then we'll do the subscriber report every other year. So that's it.
All right, well, thank you, Tim. We are going to hand it over to Mandy here, as Mandy's going to help facilitate our Q&A with Tim. We've had some questions submitted from our subscribers that she is going to run through, and then Tim is going to provide an answer to them.
Thank you. So just to kind of cap things off, one of the first questions we had was, why did the North Star MLS create the subscriber report? And Tim, I think you did a nice job of going, through a thorough explanation of that. So to kind of take it and turn it a little bit, we've put this together, we've invested in it, you've walked through the key parts of it. If you could, tell this group of 130 plus people here to go do something with it, how do you want them to use it?
I think with this first report, we really covered the base of what an MLS is. So I think while it's not important to your everyday business that you understand the everyday business of the MLS, if it's something that interests you, this report will probably be the most important one we put out moving forward into the years, because it really provides you a foundation of how the business operates and how it services you. So I would say spend some time getting to know that, even though it's kind of maybe a little geeky to understand how many MLSs there are in the nation, how different each of them are. It's also very informative, because I'm sure that the people that are attending this are some of the people that are the most involved at their local association, or involved at their brokerage, or their really top producers, because oftentimes we get sort of lost in the shuffle of the 22,000. So the people that are really paying attention and actually read emails are the ones that I expect are on this call, and you affect change. So if the more you know about how this business works and how we operate, the more that you can sort of weigh in on whether or not that's the right thing for the future. I think that's probably the best advice I can give.
Thanks. And again, the QR code that's on the screen now will work to get to the T360 site where it's housed. We've had a couple of questions where people want to be able to download it. It's at 70 plus pages, a really big unwieldy PDF that would probably kill email. And that's how T360 goes about making it available too. So it's the access to the report there. All right, next question we had is the MLS involved in the settlement along with NAR settlement? So what's North Star's involvement right now?
We are a covered MLS. We're wholly association owned. We do have to take some actions, though. We have to opt in. If you've been following closely, you've probably downloaded the actual settlement and you've probably read it. I've probably read it 100 times by now. But Appendix B would be what you're looking for, that outlines the requirements of the MLS, and we have to sign that and return it by a certain date to make sure that the MLS itself is covered. So the answer is yes, we're in and covered under the settlement.
And then the next question too was, because people go out and read real estate news or Inman, and they're seeing all kinds of settlement news come in. The third question was around, if we weren't part of the settlement, just the MLS is owned by the associations, which in turn is owned by members. Did members have any liability with these lawsuits?
I don't know if members directly had liability. I mean, obviously, if you're following it, you saw that several brokerages had their own settlement. In the NAR settlement, I think they've covered every member and every brokerage under $2 billion. So if you were above $2 billion in annual revenue, I think you had to go out and negotiate your own settlement, which you probably see those stories happening in pretty rapid fire succession here. So I would say that NAR has their members covered. NAR has their associations covered. That's who they really negotiated with. And then Appendix B becomes how they're adding MLSs to it. So even if on a really extreme hypothetical, an MLS opts out of the settlement and says, nope, we'd rather go it on our own, members, brokers, as long as the brokerage is under 2 billion or has negotiated their own settlement, they're still covered under the settlement because of what NAR did.
Great, thanks. And then the next question is, how will the post-settlement MLS be relevant?
I'm pausing because this is just a bit of an annoying question to me. I mean, if you somehow believe that compensation was the total value of the MLS, I don't think you've imagined a world without one. If you imagine waking up tomorrow and the MLS is gone, you might think, well, I'll just go to one of the websites and I'll look at all the homes that are there. I'm sorry, none of the homes are there because the MLS just went out of business and the MLS provides those listings under a contract. And the second we're gone, all those listings are gone from the website. So they would overnight lose 90+% of all the listings on all the major portals. So just from that distribution factor, it becomes a really weird situation. Could you rebuild it? Yeah, I'm sure. The technology side of the MLS business wouldn't be hard to reproduce, but now every listing in the country has to be re-entered onto some portal. And then once it's on that portal, do they have an agreement to distribute it to another portal? And now you're an agent that's in a situation where you got to go look at every brokerage website and every portal to get a full market picture. It's really ugly, and that has nothing to do with whether or not compensation's in or out of the MLS. I think of things like, I think basic vital signs of a home are more valuable in an MLS than compensation. Imagine if we took away bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, and kept compensation. I think it would be more devastating to take away those sort of basic vitals than a compensation field. They're just so important to how you communicate and interact with customers from a very generic level of data, right? Think of just the basic rules of the marketplace that allows what I think is the biggest value of the MLS. If you think the MLS boils down to, if you're reading some of the pundits, it's cooperation, compensation is what they keep saying. Cooperation is probably 90% of the reason for its existence, right? It's a marketplace where all of you come together and under a common set of rules, as competitors, you agree to share insight into the listings that you have so that you don't have to go all over the world. And I mean, in other countries, if you've tried to buy a house, and I haven't, but I've heard the horror stories of you got to get in your car and drive to 8 or 9 brokerage offices just to get 70% of what's available in the market. It's a very weird world without those basic rules that govern the marketplace. And then I think it's some really simple things like we were talking about products. The leveraged buying power of 22,000 people is absolutely amazing. I used to work at Remine, and Remine would license to an MLS anywhere from 20 cents to $5 a member, right? Depending on size. And I'm being generic there. Those maybe weren't their actual prices, but they're pretty close. They sell it on the market direct to a single person for $199 a month. So just the leveraged buying power and the negotiating power to be able to do a group buy around a lot of the technology that's vital to the everyday business saves agents and brokers an absolute ton of money and headaches of having to deal with those vendor relationships on their own. So I don't know, a world without compensation, yeah, I'm sure it's scary. We're going to have to evolve. We're going to have to learn new ways of negotiating directly with buyers and directly with sellers. Homes will still sell. Agents will still work out what their value is and how they're getting compensated for it. I don't want to downplay that it's not a monumental shift in how the business functions at a very face-to-face, toe-to-toe level, but I'm not as concerned about the compensation leaving the MLS and that being the end of MLS as some of the pundits out there are. There's just too much value involved.
Great. Next kind of shifts, and you started to touch on this again with like the product offerings that we have along with listing capabilities at Northstar MLS. So the first question kind of in this little group is, why did you cut ListTrack and Remine as free options?
Great, I just used Remine as an example. So ListTrack, we actually didn't cut. ListTrack itself changed its business model. So you can still use ListTrack, they just now charge for it. Previous, it was a sort of a freemium service, if you will, because they were monetizing it through advertising. I guess that business model didn't really work out for them, so they've added a fee to it. So you can still get it, you can still use it. It's just got a direct subscription fee at this point. And then Remine became one of those products that over time, because it wasn't being adopted, because if you remember, we had a page where we were going through adoption, we measure that constantly. And at some point, even with the leveraged buying power of the MLS being able to reduce that price, if 97% of the members aren't using a product and it's only valuable to 3%, and believe me, I understand that the 3% who used Remine and really got it and understood what it could do for their business are very passionate about it. So it wasn't an easy thing for the board members to really look at and decide to cut. But eventually you make a decision that we could be utilizing that money to benefit more members with a different service, like a welcome mat, like video, that kind of thing. So we don't just continue to add products and then raise fees because we add more products. We actually look at the mix and look at the adoption of that and make some of the tough decisions on where we're going to invest the money to better serve the more people, I guess, is the right answer there.
Great. And then sort of related to that too, with just how we update and keep our products and offering list, but also with the upcoming changes to the buyer's agent compensation. And I don't know if that's going to, impact the flux of people who come or go from being in real estate, but this person wanted to know, are we going to see reductions in the quarterly and annual dues as a result?
I guess the short answer to that is probably not, right? That's just, unfortunately, that's not how it works. As you lose members, you don't lose cost. An easy example is, if you have a teenager that ages out and goes to college, your house payment doesn't reduce because less people live there. Unfortunately, the burden maybe grows a little bit if they were an income earner. And I think the same thing applies to MLS. The contracts we end up in are multi-year agreements, right? That's how you get the better pricing. It's how you get the better, I guess, terms of service, those kind of things. So it's all a negotiation when you're bringing a product in. And as you lose members, you don't deprecate products either. You tend to look internally at the company. So we have gone through a lot of scenario planning because of the settlements and because of the fear out there that there may be a member reduction. I think the first thing I'd say is that the market's changing, and market typically drives membership. We haven't seen how a lawsuit settlement drives membership, but I would say if we lose members, it's probably going to be more market driven, especially over this first year as people continue to stay in the business to figure it out, to see whether or not buyer's agency really changes all that dramatically, and whether or not we can continue to support the number of agents we have in the industry, which is a whole other question. But at NorthStar, what we'll do instead is we'll look internally at how we keep the services that you have available to you, even though they're rising on a per member cost, because as we lose members, that per member cost increases a little bit. So we do have some scalable contracts that provide us a floor of members that as we lose members, we'll pay less because we'll pay for less members. But once you hit that floor, you lose members and you continue to pay at the floor. So in scenarios like that, we look at things like administrative costs, right? We travel to 8 or 10 events for continued education at the executive level and for board members. We would probably quickly move to stopping some of that travel, whatever's the maybe considered non-mandatory travel. If we really lost a lot of members, we'd probably stop all travel and all of the industry involvement. We would look at things like freezing hiring, freezing pay increases, right? If you run a company, you understand that typically as inflation goes up, so does salary for your company. So we would look at all those things that you would have to look at in your own business. How do you start cutting expenses before you start cutting products and services or raising fees? Eventually you get to the point where you may have to cut services. And eventually maybe you get to the point where you have to raise fees. But we would stave that off as long as we could, I think.
Great, thanks. Next question kind of again shifts to not knowing how all the settlement, will finally shake out and what will be, when it is complete. But this question is, will Northstar MLS become a fully independent organization in the near future?
Probably not. We're owned by associations. So if we were to become an independent organization, I guess they'd have to agree to sell the MLS. And you'd have to ask them what their plans are. I would say they have zero plans to sell the MLS though. So I don't see us becoming an independent company at any point in the future. Could the MLS itself, like industry-wide, become some sort of an independent company? I guess that's possible too, right? With technology advances, it's possible that a competitor emerges that's a private company, and if brokers and agents chose that over the companies that they own and have involvement in, I would be surprised, but it's possible, I guess. It's just very unlikely, and we have no plans to do it.
Great. Next question is, I'd like to be able to send a full report to both myself and my clients. Is that against the MLS rules? And with this one, we weren't exactly sure if they were talking about a listing report or if we were talking about the T3 report. So Tim, if you kind of want to touch on both, just to make sure we're answering the question as it was intended.
Yeah, so giving this some thought, I would say that I always default to transparency, so I don't have a problem with you sending anything to your client. And I think client becomes key word there, right? If you want to send them a link to this report, send them a link to this report. If your client's that interested in how MLS business is run and what products and services we're providing you, that's a pretty special client. Hold on to them because they are deep into your business and they love you. If you're talking about a full report off of the MLS, there are things on there that are like agent remarks, stuff like that. And if you have a client relationship, I don't know, I can't think of a scenario where you wouldn't share with the client remarks that are pertinent to them from the agent remarks, pertinent to their decision. You're a fiduciary to them. So yeah, I have no issues with that. I'd caution against maybe, making some of that stuff like a public Facebook post of, look at Mike Bisbing's agent remarks on this. That just seems kind of foolish and misplaced. We don't have an actual rule preventing it, but everybody on here uses common sense. You're good business people. You run a good business. I would say just, do it with discretion.
And last question, we ran a little bit over on our time here, so thank you for everyone who's stayed with us, and we'll have recording available for those that did have to drop off. But what can you say about the condo and townhouse markets? Are they soft? And if so, what's behind it?
Yeah, so referencing a tool that you have access to called InfoSparks. I am not a condo or townhouse expert, but I went into InfoSparks and I asked it. And so I'll just give you its sort of 3 sentences. Including median sale prices are up 5.4%. to an average of 289,900. Days on market up 14.3% to 23 days for a month's supply of inventory. New listings are heading up 3.4% over prior year at 16,670. So that's my extent of knowledge about the actual market, because I don't live and work in it from a practitioner standpoint on a daily basis. But InfoSparks is there. It's quick, it's easy, it can help you figure out what the market conditions are.
And you can look for big markets or even as small as a couple block radius. So really kind of a cool tool there. Tim, anything I didn't ask that you wanted to address?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to come and listen to me ramble on about a report you can easily read. You do have my phone number. I noticed David put it in chat. So if you have questions about the report, if I didn't answer something you're really interested in, call me.
Thank you everyone for attending today. Again, thank you, Tim, for running through the report and doing this with us here this morning. We hope that some of you found this valuable. And again, we will be sending out a recording and some information via email to those who registered for the webinar today. With that, I'll let you go enjoy the rest of your beautiful day.